Amazon's The Rings of Power is not an adaptation of Tolkien's work. Rather, it is a blatant attempt to co-opt it, to bend and break it into something it never was or wanted to be. A vehicle for current year bullshit. Now, of course, we all know that a certain degree of creative liberty is required when adapting one media to another. Simply copying a book word for word will not necessarily lead to a good TV show, as there are many different considerations to be taken into account depending upon the nature of the media. Time, for example. The Silmarillion, intended more as a background source book than a novel, spans over thousands of years. And so Amazon choosing to condense the relevant portion of that into a single, more easily followable timeline with all of the major characters living in the same period falls under that aforementioned creative liberty. Look no further than the oft-criticized timeline of The Witcher's first season for an example of how story flow is vital to an audience's experience of that show. But that is also the only understandable decision made by the pair of inexperienced showrunners working on The Rings of Power so far. Now, forgive me, for I am sure you have all gazed upon this decidedly un-dwarfish thing more times than you would like to recall. Yet, she serves as the perfect example of Amazon's open and obvious malice. I mentioned this in my previous video on the topic, but this character is point for point the precise opposite of what a dwarf should be in The Lord of the Rings. The most obvious, of course, being her ridiculous lack of a beard. Something every single dwarf is born with and has without exception. And do not get me started on the barely perceptible fuzz on her jawline. That is not a beard. You know what that is? That is a litmus test. Because if you try to argue that that is a beard, then the Amazon's executives will know that you are willing to bend over and take your complimentary corporate ass ramming with a smile and a thank you very much, sir. And this is not a mistake. This is not an accident or a corporate whoopsie. This is deliberate malice, created and endorsed by this woman, one of Amazon's Tolkien scholars and unironic equality and diversity officer. Excuse me. Equality and diversity commissar. There, fixed it for you. Unlike the timeline shrink, this has nothing to do with the viewer's experience, or the story, or the flow, or anything relevant at all. It is a diversity commissar pushing her personal political agenda into the show, with her interpretations of Tolkien's words. You know the interpretations. In fact, I believe there was a literal example made by her where Gollum was described as dark as the night, indicating that he is being stealthy and sneaky in the shadows, but she, of course, figured, could this mean that Gollum is black? Yeah, sure, why not? He transitioned to black from Hobbit when he got the ring, you see. And of course, this is not happening unbeknownst to Amazon either. They are absolutely partners in cringe and crime against Tolkien. And it does not stop there. Look at the attire of our dwarf, heavy quotation marks here. It is nothing like anything else we have ever seen on dwarves previously. It is flimsy, loose, and airy. The precise opposite of what you would ever want when living deep underground. If anything, it is more elven than it is dwarvish. She even has little dainty plucked eyebrows instead of the massive bushes every other dwarf has had. And on that point too, just compare her to every other dwarf. It is supposed to be damn near impossible to tell a male from a female dwarf. And yet again, she looks nothing like any of the other dwarves we have ever seen. And finally, of course, we must point out that this dwarven princess of Khazad-dûm, of all places, the deepest of all the dwarven halls, is played by a black woman. Why? Was it because she is a hideous mutant, born without a beard, and with a unique, never-before-seen skin disease? I suppose there certainly would be a storyline of sorts, or alternatively, could it be because Amazon mandates that, quote, regionally underrepresented race/ethnic/cultural groups need to be represented in speaking roles? I wonder. Then again, seeing as we didn't see any black people at all in the Lord of the Rings films, it does indeed suggest that the general population took some rather extreme measures against those with this complexion. Jokes aside, the point is that none of this is a coinky-dink. This is a $400 million plus operation, producing a show that cost $250 million to acquire the rights to in the first place, with 5 seasons already lined up and greenlit. Nothing happens by accident. And so, our mutant dwarf, of course, also isn't the only weird exception to the Lord of the Rings norm. We also have the world's first black elf. And once again, just to make it painfully obvious that Amazon is actively taking the piss, he is a grey elf. The palest of the pale elves. And just as a final, tiny little insult to injury, he also has super short hair. Once more, point for point, the antithesis of what an elf is supposed to be. It doesn't get much better either once we get to the characters that have somehow managed to avoid the browning brush of Amazon. Galadriel, needing to be a modern-day strong female character, telling those darnable silly old men how everything is supposed to be done, is a warrior princess now, and a general leading an army, rather than a politician or anything like that. That'd be silly, right? And Elrond is an architect that also embraces the not elf, but I have plastic ears look as well. So our warrior is a peaceful builder, whereas our peaceful builder is a warrior. Righty-o then. Why the hell not? And you can already see how this is all gonna work out. I bet you right now Galadriel is going to be yet another. Almost every female character in this show is going to know what's going on. They're all gonna call this incoming disaster, and they're gonna tell those silly old menfolk that they should totally stop doing what they're doing. I bet you even that the dwarven princess at some point will probably tell Durian that he's digging too far, too greedily, and when the Balrog shows up, or Balrog more correctly, well, you can see the scene from there. And honestly as well, speaking of Durian, the only character that still looks and appears to be as Tolkien intended is Durian IV, making me even more sure that he is going to be the butt of many a joke, though, to be fair, we have yet to see whether or not he will truly be a Tolkien-esque dwarf, or whether or not he will have a forbidden tragic love with a young male warrior. Come, polish my spear, young sturdy lad. Maybe his name can be Oakenshield, just to really hammer home the point. And with all of the above seemingly custom-made to create a seismic flop, one might also be forgiven for wondering what, by Bezos's shiny head, Amazon is doing. They are sinking a nation's budget into this, more than most nations' budgets. $1 billion into a diversity soup that seems intent on ramming itself onto the rocks of racial politics before even leaving port. Especially as well as the timing could not seem to be any worse. with wokeist nonsense on a full-out retreat across nearly every strata of society, and gatekeeping, God blessed be its name, gaining strength in equal measure. Not to mention genuine workers' uprising against the authoritarian left and their ridiculous health mandates happening in almost every damn nation across the globe. You would think this to be a particularly inopportune moment to fire off a billion-dollar virtue signal. But that is, of course, if you think the point of the show is to earn money. It is not. Simply because they don't need to. Our failure as a society to properly shackle corporations has led to a scenario where a company like Amazon can pump $1 billion into a pet propaganda piece, and even should it not garner a single cent in income, the resultant loss would not even make up a percentage of Amazon's value, which, by the way, is currently estimated to be in excess of $1.5 trillion. Allow me to repeat that, $1.5 trillion in market value. Oh yes, the Voldemort virus has been kind indeed to the owners of the wage cage. And so for Amazon, the real purpose of the Rings of Power is prestige, politics, and possession. The first one is easy enough to understand. Prestige, a reputation for excellence, or in Amazon's case, one for bare, basic, biatch competence, something Amazon is sorely lacking right now. Their venture into the realms of gaming produced New World, a thoroughly disappointing design by committee soulless heap of a grind treadmill. The game had every imaginable advantage, and early on was quite promising. The idea of exploring a new world steeped in Indian mythology with monsters roaming the land, that was pretty cool. I played in the early alpha version and I was actually rather impressed back then. Complete open PvP with an interesting bandit bounty system, a dark and sinister tone, and a lot of mystery hanging in the air. It is, frankly, flying pigs level amazing that what we ended up with was one of the emptiest and least engaging games I have ever played. And so thoroughly ill-planned, ill-informed, and ill-executed. The economy was set up to failure from day one, with rampant increases in cost and a rapidly decreasing value of every conceivable commodity. The PvP was gated to Beelzebub's backyard and back, and the server issues were constant, even leading Amazon to banning people who used gold duplication glitches, banning them for their own mistakes. Amazon Games' only success so far is adapting a Korean MMO that has been out for years already, and they've managed to spoil a lot of that goodwill too by screwing up the servers. $1 trillion corporation can't afford to put up enough servers for their new MMO. It is just actually sad. And what of their TV history? They produced the subterraneanly underwhelming Wheel of Time, another fantasy epic plagued by race swaps aplenty, and where the main character gets his big, climactic scene, the destruction of an army of beastmen all by himself to demonstrate that yes, he is actually the Dragon Reborn. He had that scene stolen from him by 2 side characters, 2 unnamed extras, and a chick we were introduced to in that very self-same episode, who also dies in that very self-same episode. It is worse on every level than the original solution. And if Amazon's productions honestly have done anything at all so far, it is to provide final proof positive that all the money in the world cannot purchase talent, passion, or a soul. Yet, if at first you don't succeed, shovel, shovel, and shovel some more $100 bills into the furnace until you do. And Black Dwarf Princess is merely the last attempt to get recognized as an actual production studio rather than just a large series of holding pens for salary cattle. Of course, I might point out that doing the exact same thing over and over again expecting a different result is the very definition of insanity. But I would never be so churlish. Equally self-explanatory is the politics side of things. Because there is literally only one reason to cast a character that lives miles underground and has always done so since the inception of their species as a black person. And that is the current year racism of identity politics. Amazon could have spent $1 billion, the cost of the Lord of the Rings TV show, on hiring a massive, skilled writing team to do what Tolkien did all by his lonesome, namely create a new mythos. Where Tolkien took inspiration from Anglo-Saxon and Norse sources, Amazon could have done the same with African mythology. Africa has a tremendous wealth of stories and legends that have remained almost completely untapped. If Amazon did this, they would literally own the entire market and the entire target audience. You could of course play it safe with the oldie but goldie Egyptian gods, but the bolder choice would be to explore the characters of deeper Africa, like a name I'm going to be butchering, Amadioha. I'm sure I screwed that up in many plentiful ways, but he is the god of thunder, and he reminds me quite a bit of Thor, so I'm quite partial to him, obviously. But of course, as is clear to anyone not a massive corporate shill, the point is not to elevate black people or their history, it is to pity them, to throw them a diversity quota roll here and there, because Bezos is just such a darn nice dude. And this goes hand to hand with the final point, possession. Again, Amazon is not interested in the Lord of the Rings. They are interested in the brand and turning it into their brand. If they just made an honest Lord of the Rings TV show, it would print money like the US government. That is what Peter Jackson movies did, and they are revered to this day. But doing so would let it remain Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, a timeless work that has entertained millions regardless of race, politics, or opinion. That is obviously not what Amazon wants. They want to reflect the modern day, or more accurately, their values and their opinions as of precisely right about now. This is partially done through simple hubris, the absolute conviction of a zealot they are right and nothing else matters, and it is partly done as a shield and a dividing line. Literally, long before the TV show is even out, we have articles defending it out of tribal loyalty. Amazon's Lord of the Rings team knew they'd face Tolkien fan backlash over diverse casting. Yes, it was literally a part of their marketing strategy to face this backlash, seeing as the articles were written before the backlash even occurred. And I guarantee to you that on every corpo site right now, there are two other pre-written articles. One praising the Rings of Power as a stunning and powerful piece of television, and another blaming the internet trolls for its plummeting ratings. And on that point, allow me to expand a pinch on why people are unhappy. It is because it's diverse casting. Not the right casting, not the best actors for the best role, but rather the one that ticks the most boxes on the Amazon required diversity spreadsheet. Once more, I refer you back again here to our black elf. Ignoring his skin color for a moment, does this person look elven to you? Does he look like a member of a race thousands of years old, graceful, near ethereal beings of elegance and beauty unmatched amongst men? Because all I see is a cosplay with plastic ears. There's a very good reason why in the Peter Jackson films the elves were usually filmed with a great deal of accompanying bloom. Because here's the thing, Amazon and practically all modern-day fantasy just does not understand. Elves are not humans. And the distinction should be immediately obvious. They should not move like us or talk like us. Every motion should be measured and precise, graceful, alien, in fact. 40k got this spot on with a little lore blurb in, I believe, one of the main rules codexes, where we get to read a part of the memories of an imperial diplomat to the Eldar. Now, the Eldar are the science fiction variant of the Warhammer Fantasy's Elves, which are heavily inspired by Lord of the Rings elves. And the description of the Eldar were that they all looked superficially human. If you were to look at a painting of one, or a picture, you might be fooled into thinking that they were just a pretty person. But the illusion is dispelled instantly once you see them in motion. Because they are alien. The way they move, their grace, their aura, their gravitas, their feel, all of that should come across as decidedly different to that of a human. Yet now the fantasy races are just people. Again, they're just people. In fact, they are cast not for their skill, not for their fit to the character or the role, but because they are the correct type of human. I do not want my fantasy to reflect reality. I want to see elves and dwarves and the high men of Numenor, not my fudging neighbour. Yet again, this seems to be a point that flies quite far over the heads of the Amazon executives. What they probably will succeed with, however, and this is somewhat depressing, is first and foremost, this will be popular. There is no way to stop it. None. Zero, zip, nilch, null. You stamp Lord of the Rings on something, it will sell. It will be watched, and it will push subscription numbers. Even the Star Wars trilogy, with a cardboard box that squeaks, made money. Now, Disney took an absolute pounding in the toy market, and they ravaged the intellectual property that is Star Wars' value in the doing of it, but the Star Wars trilogy still made cash, which is insane considering. And this too will probably do very well, at least for a season. Its Achilles heel, however, I think, is the fact that it's planned for 5 seasons. Even the amazingly popular cultural phenomenon that was Game of Thrones, the show every other show is currently aping, got quite pounded during that last season for obvious reasons. But even were that to happen, that's a victory for Amazon. Because again, what they are doing here is trying to transform Tolkien into another Amazon property. But that does not mean that it is pointless to resist. Far from it, in fact. If it can be turned into as toxic a property as it currently appears to be, then I guarantee you there will be plenty of other studios, many of which have a whole lot less money, but a whole lot more soul and talent, willing to pick up the mantle of fantasy and perhaps even Lord of the Rings, as the gaming rights are currently up for sale. And with the way the winds are blowing right now, I genuinely would not be surprised if within 5 or so years we'll be seeing a Lord of the Rings style product, a video game or something along those lines, which markets itself by saying, in our setting, Haradrim look like Haradrim and dwarves look like dwarves. Revolutionary idea, I know. Yet, it is a bright future, is it not? Incidentally, I gotta do a video on the effectiveness of boycotting and modern day resistance to wokeist entertainment as well in the Gatekeeping series soon, because there are some interesting points to be elaborated on in the idea of a toxic series like the Star Wars trilogy, and that the damage done to an IP can significantly outweigh the financial benefits in the short term. Anywho, until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.